Vivian, I think what stood out for me is what you didn't say. And I think that's an important takeaway from that point. You didn't say, well, give praise to results. The folks who are delivering the results, that's who gets the praise. No one else gets the praise, just the folks with results, which we often see too, very common. You didn't say that at all. In fact, you didn't even mention results. You said effort and progress. Welcome to the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm your host this week. I'm Brandon Smith. I'm one of the co-founders of Leadership Foundry. And our topic today is resilience. Specifically, how as leaders can we become more resilient and how can we create organizations that are resilient? So joining us today on the show is my guest, Vivian Blade. She is a leadership and resilience expert. She's been recognized as one of Engagedly's top 100 global HR influencers of 2021. And she's a sought-after leadership expert and thought leader. She's also the author of Resilience Ready, the Leader's Guide to Thriving Through Unrelenting Crisis. So in the talk today, we're going to have a great conversation around what does it mean to be resilient as a leader? How do we create these resilient organizations? And Vivian's going to offer us a 5-part model to what does resilient look like. So as usual with my podcast, I will share with you my notes at the very end of all the highlights from my conversation with Vivian, but I encourage you to listen really closely to Vivian's 5 points so you can become more resilient today.
Welding together practical insights and powerful conversations to forge world-class leaders. This is the Leadership Foundry podcast. Now, here's this week's host, Brandon Smith, co-founder of the Leadership Foundry.
Well, Vivian, I'm so excited about our conversation today. I think what the last 2 years have taught us as leaders is not only are things uncertain, crises are right around the corner, and leading through those with resilience is the job of any leader. So I am just thrilled with having you on the show here today to not only talk about your book, but talk about, as leaders, what we can be doing to do a better job of not only being resilient ourselves, but creating organizations and companies that are resilient. So before we get started, for my listeners that maybe aren't as familiar with you and your work, share a little bit more about your background. What is it that keeps you busy today, and how did you get passionate about some of these topics?
Great. Brandon, thank you so much for having me. I'm excited to be here and excited about the work that you're doing in this leadership community and helping us all to create better workplaces, which is a lot of what I do today, working with organizations to help them to build better workplaces by helping their leaders really be equipped with the resilience that they need to be able to adapt. And this time that we're in, we're all transitioning and trying to just deal with all that's going on in this space. Got to where I am today after having had a corporate career with Humana and GE and great opportunities for leadership development, to be in leadership roles, management development course, for example, at GE Crotonville, and all of that, and was on track to really continue to move up in my corporate career. Had different roles in Lean Six Sigma as a master black belt in running customer experience. I was a product manager, also working with GE, worked in e-commerce as well. So I've had a wonderful career, which gave me a lot of great experience, knowledge, and mentorship, sponsorship myself that I could use to help other organizations, which is what I do today. So I was laid off actually in the downturn of 2008, 2009, and grateful to have had the experience that I have had to give me the privilege of working with organizations today to help them to be better.
Well, it's funny the way you said it at the end, it sounds like resilience to me. That event that was unexpected turned into opening so many doors and opportunities. Mm-hmm. But who am I to define resilience? So I think that's a great starting place for us. When people say resilience, what does that mean to be resilient? I'm curious what your perspective is on that.
Yeah. I use, when I talk about resilience and define it in the workshops and the coaching that I do, I use the definition from the American Psychological Association, which says that resilience is really how well we adapt to disruptions, change, crises, unexpected events and occurrences, all of those things that hit us unexpectedly. But it's all about adapting. And so, therefore, I'm really focused a lot on helping organizations and leaders develop this skill set around resilient adaptability, putting those two things together, because we can adapt, but we don't necessarily have to adapt well or, adapt with resilience. But when we do, we have an opportunity to really thrive. And so that's the journey and the mission that I'm on.
I love that, Vivian. So I'm going to ask you a follow-up question. So what does adapting well look like? Is it, take a couple of years, take a couple of months, and maybe it's different between a person and a company, but I would love to know your perspective on, when we adapt well, what does that look like?
Yeah, when we adapt well, we have, this opportunity to, one, be self-aware, first of all, of where we are and how a crisis may hit us. But, and then we can, as we go from the amygdala response, that fight or flight response, but really be more thoughtful. And when we can really look at resilience across these 5 principles and what I have created as a framework around these servant leadership principles and practices. And so organizations, teams, and individuals, leaders who are resilient, really have these 5 key qualities. One, they have an optimistic outlook. So they really focus on perspective. A second principle is purpose, and really being thoughtful around a meaningful purpose, the why we're here, what we are intended to do. Then there's perseverance is the third resilience ready principle. Partnership is the fourth principle, and praise is the fifth. And we can dig into any of those. Oftentimes what we think about when we think about resilience and what that looks like, a lot of people think about the concept of bouncing back. And rather than bouncing back, in fact, with my workshop I had this morning, I have these wristbands that really help us to think about the concept, but I want you to think about it differently. When we bounce back, first of all, we're not the same when we've gone through a crisis. We've been stretched, and every crisis is different. And we don't have to be so ironclad to think that we really just have to bounce back and everything's going to be okay. But it goes back to that adaptability definition, how we can really adapt to the things that are facing us. And when we think about rubber bands, there's a lot of flexibility, and they have a lot of utility too, hold things together. So that's what I like for people to think about when I think about resilience.
I think that's a great point, because sometimes bouncing back indicates we just get back up and keep doing with what we were doing before. But the way you're framing it is almost we may get back up and then adapt to what we need to do going forward, which is which is different. It's kind of like your story. It's those you got back up and then adapted to where you wanted to go going forward.
Right.
So we got these great 5 ideas and traits: optimistic outlook, purpose, perseverance, partnership, and praise. I almost wish the first one was also a P, Vivian, so it would just be like 5 Ps.
It actually is. It's perspective.
Oh, perspective. Great.
It is perspective. I talked about the optimistic outlook side of that, but it is perspective. It is a P.
Okay. So many questions about these 5. Here's my first one. Is there one of these you think is the hardest to achieve or most important right now when you think about leaders and leadership? Like if you could wave a magic wand, you could only give leaders this one right now. You would say, okay, I'm waving the magic wand and they're all getting this one.
There's a reason why they are in the order that they're in. So I'm going to start with that. And it really is perspective.
Okay.
It really lays the foundation for how we see things and the opportunities that we have. Part of my research for the book discovered that we respond to crises and challenge and change across a continuum of stages that I call these stages of internal crisis response. And we can respond as a victim of circumstance. We can settle in or figure out just kind of how to survive, and that's okay. But it's not really until we're really courageous, take that courageous step forward to something different, that we really have that opportunity where doors open for us to be able to thrive. And if we don't see that as a starting point, as a perspective, then the others really are hardly possible for us. So that mindset, and there's so much research around mindset and psychology. And again, going back to the way we respond, we talked about that amygdala response, that fight or flight. When we come into something surprising, change, something we didn't expect, and we don't know what's going to happen going forward. So we really have to check ourselves and think, where am I? That self-awareness about where I am, how am I thinking about this? Truly, what are the facts of the situation? What are the possibilities of my future? And then that sets the stage for thinking about some of the other principles.
Yeah, I love that. It's great. Makes a lot of sense that we start with that first one, and how can we have that perspective to look at things in a positive way, hopeful way versus a victim mentality. It reminds me, there was a famous theologian at Emory University's theology school. He since passed away. His name was Jim Fowler. And he used to have this saying. He said, as leaders, you want to give people hope and handles. And I think that's a nice, simple hope and handles, which is kind of what you're saying there. We've got to start with hope.
Right.
If we then go down the path of handles, and we start to think about getting people to mobilize down a direction, how do we start to get other folks moving with us as we're trying to put resilience in whether it's a team, into the team or into the whole company?
That's where purpose comes into play. Because, and so much of what we hear about and why employees are leaving their jobs and going to other workplaces or finding opportunities that fit better with their lives, it's a lot of it has to do with purpose and the meaningfulness around purpose. So if you're going to bring somebody along, and in fact, in my workshop this morning, one of the leaders mentioned this specifically, if you're going to bring other people along with you and ask them to really go through the fire and persevere, then it's got to be worth it. It's got to be something that's important. And we as leaders have to connect our team members to that. The other thing that's important to remember about purpose when we are going through change or transition or crises, that our core mission for who we are as an organization and what we do doesn't necessarily change, but our purpose and how our customers need us, how our employees need us may shift as a result of that. So we've got to be aware of that and understand, how do we need to shift to respond to the changing needs of our environment, of our clients, of our employees, of our culture, so that we can bring our best. And we know then where we're going. We have a vision, a different vision of the future and what that could be for us when we really think about purpose in a new context.
Yeah. I think that is so spot on and brilliant. What I'm curious about is some companies try and lock and load a purpose for decades, if they can. But you're proposing something I think is really important. We might need to revisit it. So when do we know when to take a step back and say, maybe we need to re-examine our purpose and make some possible adjustments?
You should always be listening to your customers and have a market intelligence that is telling you, what's going on out there. Even how your competitors are showing up in the marketplace and how things are changing. We know now more than ever the global events that affect everyone. They're not isolated. We are more connected than ever before. And so we have to be mindful of that and always be asking ourselves those questions. I think as strategic leaders, we also always have to be looking at that question about, why are we here? How is the world around us changing? How do our clients, our communities that we operate in, our employees need us differently than they may have yesterday? And how can we still stay true to our core mission of who we are? We don't want to start trying to chase every shiny new object. We stay true to who we are, but how do we just sort of reframe that? Sometimes I encourage leaders, and when we think about purposes, that we have to reframe that purpose and make it meaningful for ourselves, for our organizations, for the team that works alongside us each and every day.
Okay, so great segue into my next question, and it's one of your other P's. So I want to skip perseverance because you touched on that a little bit. I want to go to partnership because that seems to be a real challenge for most of the organizations I'm talking to today. It seems to be a byproduct of just everyone feeling so stressed and strained, where time's everyone's most precious resource and everything feels urgent all the time. So to make it simply put it, folks aren't talking to each other. Departments aren't necessarily collaborating. They're having some issues with cross collaboration. And if you're in a matrix organization, you kind of need to be talking to each other. So I would love to get your perspective on partnership and how we as leaders might be able to better encourage that, enable that, anything else to kind of get that moving in a better direction.
Absolutely. That is so important, Brandon, because really there are, a couple of sides of the coin when it comes to partnership. One is that as we are going through challenges now, and whether it's just these daily disruptions that arise, like again, the group I was just with today, all of their technology, their systems were down yesterday, month end, last day of the month. So they really had to scramble. But partnership, first and foremost is, as a leader, how I'm going to respond to that is going to be quite anxious. How do I close the books? How do I close the month? How do I make sure that all these new customer applications are processed to meet month end? All of those things. So how am I responding? And what do I need to make sure that I am taking care of and taking care of myself? So partnership starts with me making sure that I am recognizing that and reaching out to the resources and just to partner with others who can come alongside me and support me. I'm not in this alone. We can get through this together is one of the mantras from the COVID days that we remember so prevalently, but it carries us forward. And then how do we make sure that we are proactive in reaching out to the needs of our team? Recognizing, showing up with empathy, with different experiences that people are having, making sure that our team members are aware of the resources that are available to them. I was just talking with a potential coaching client just the other day who was sharing some challenges. And one of the things that I suggested is one of the first things you might want to look at is, what does your employee assistance program provide for you? We as leaders need to be able to do that for our team members. And then to cap it off, it is making sure that we are inclusive. How are we making sure that people feel like, one, they're listened to, that they are valued, that they are important, and that we are building relationships. We are strengthening those connections. We're bringing in a diversity of ideas and strategies and people and team members and experiences and all of those things that make us rich and ripe and strong to move forward. So that is partnership.
So I think anyone listening to this would say, yeah, I want that. I want that. What stands in our way? What makes it so hard? Whether we're trying to build inclusive teams or we're trying to either personally reach out for resources, identifying our own needs and reach out for resources, or encouraging our team members to do that. Why is this so difficult to do?
I think there are a couple of key things that really stand out to me. One is vulnerability, for ourselves. And that's hard. That is hard. I won't deny it. It is hard for all of us to be vulnerable and put ourselves in that space where we are saying, I need something. I need help. I'm struggling a little bit here. And then we have so much going on, I think. There are just so many things. I hear that time and time again. I know you do too, Brandon. There are so many things on our plate.
Yeah.
Somebody's told me I mark one thing off and I add 5 more. So I think just the time that we have to be present, to listen and to demonstrate empathy and to make those connections is one of the biggest challenges we have.
Yeah. So, Vivian, there is a 5th point of your 5 points around resilience that we haven't gotten to yet, and that's praise. Mm-hmm. So talk to us a little bit about praise, what that means, and we as leaders, what we can start to do to get better at that.
Praise, Brandon, is so important, and it really caps this off nicely because it's really all about recognition, appreciation, and recognition, and gratitude, right? Practicing gratitude ourselves for what's around us, and praise is about making sure that we are appreciating effort that's given, and just think about everything it takes. When you're going through change, when you're going through a daily disruption, when you're going through a crisis, the effort that it takes just to get things done day to day, even sometimes the smallest things, what seems small. And sometimes we as leaders don't see the effort that it takes, but we need to make sure that we are asking, even though it seems insignificant, that thank you, that I appreciate you, says I see you. You are important. What you're doing and what you're putting in is important. So the effort and the progress that's being made. The other thing that we have to do too is recognize that in ourselves. Give ourselves some grace, which we often don't do. One of the leaders that I interviewed for the Resilience Ready book, Tanya Jackson, she is a senior vice president with Lexmark International. And she talked about the fact that when you go through a crisis and change, you expect it. It's going to be messy. It's going to be bumpy. It's not going to be perfect because we can't expect it to be. There aren't perfect decisions when we go through a crisis or we go through challenges. And we need to make some space for that. It's okay because we won't take risks. If we don't make space for that, and we won't grow, we won't get to what the possibilities could be for ourselves if we don't allow some of that space. So giving ourselves some grace, giving others some grace, and recognizing and appreciation for all of the effort and all of the progress that is being made.
Vivian, I think what stood out for me is what you didn't say. And I think that's an important takeaway from that point. You didn't say, well, give praise to results. The folks who are delivering the results, that's who gets the praise. No one else gets the praise, just the folks with results, which we often see too, very common. You didn't say that at all. In fact, you didn't even mention results. You said effort and progress. And I liked how you even said, and we should do the same thing for ourselves, the effort we're putting in and the progress we're making. Rather than, beating ourselves up for not having completed the race, we're working really hard and we're at mile 15 and there's still some more miles to go, but that's 15 miles we've run. We should really give ourselves some grace and praise around that.
Right.
And I love that. And I think that's such a great perspective on praise because so often praise gets tied to feedback, which gets tied to results. And I love you spun that in a way that is so different and so refreshing.
Thank you. And, that really sets the tone for what Resilience Ready is all about and having the skill set around resilient adaptability. It's less about the operational checklist, crisis management checklist, and it's about the humanity. It's about the human capital. Resilience is an individual and a team sport. We have to find that resilience within ourselves and use that to help extend that and build that, develop that within the people within our circle who are so important to helping us get through. We don't get through anything by ourselves. So we need others.
Yeah, I love that. Nice way to sum that up. It's so much about humanity, and it's a team sport. I think that's so beautiful. And yet when we get stressed, that's just being human beings, we tend to turtle, right? It's all about me, me and my little shell, and not about others. And so you're really reminding us and encouraging us and inviting us to reach out to others and bring others along. So powerful and so critical. Well, I know our time is starting to run short. Before we get to the end and I get to my question I always ask all my guests, this book came out in 2021. You had another book that also came out in 2021. Maybe if you could just touch on that one briefly and a few of the highlights of that book.
Yes, really quickly. Resilience Ready also has a companion workbook that came out in 2021. So both of those things. And then Influence and Talent Development is part of a soft skills series that the Association for Talent Development produced and released in 2021. And influence is one of those important soft skills that they felt that not only talent development professionals, but leaders also need it. So I wrote Influence really as a leadership book, and back to servant leadership principles again, but there is a framework that is called Scale Your Influence for Greater Impact. And the scale framework represents the S, social capital, so building those relationships again. The C is courage, A is authenticity, L is leaning in with passion, and the E is engaging a diverse and inclusive workplace community. So you see how nicely too and closely this whole influence and how we influence ties to being resilient, creating this better workplace where people really genuinely can say, this is a place I love to work and I feel valued. And so these are tools to help leaders to be able to do that. I
think it's great. And I love it. That fits perfectly under the beautiful tent and umbrella you made of humanity and team sport. Because both of the frameworks really fall underneath that so well. Well, Vivian, this has been an absolute joy and pleasure. So I ask all my guests on the Leadership Foundry podcast this question: what's one practical tip you have for us on how we can either get better leading our teams today or tomorrow? What's one practical tip you have for us?
Now, I'm going to say to lead on purpose. And here is why I say that. My mother, we just lost her recently a few months ago. And my sister made a point to share with us an experience that she had where our mother said, I love and I live on purpose. And so when we lead on purpose, it's about other people. It's not about us. It's about investing in and developing the team around us, the people in our circle, to help them to be better, to create that environment again where people genuinely can refrain that this is a place where I love to work and I feel valued. And I'm going to tell my friends that they need to work here too. So that is one key piece of advice I would give.
I love that, Vivian. Thank you so much. So if people want to follow you, purchase any of the countless books you've written, where can they go?
You can find me on LinkedIn. I'm very active there. So Vivian Blade, that's me on LinkedIn. I also have a website, vivianblade.com. And then there are also resources available to go along with each of these books. So with Resilience Ready, the URL is resilienceready.today. So resilienceready.today. And then for Influence, it's influencewithscale.com. influencewithscale.com.
Vivian, thank you so much for the great work that you're putting out and continuing to put out in the world to make the world a better place and to help us all as leaders be a little bit better as we try really, really hard to bring more humanity into the workplace and make those workplaces more team sports so we all win together. So thank you. Right. Your work is a gift to all of us. I really, really appreciate you coming on the show today.
Thank you so much, Brandon. It's been great to be with you.
Folks, wasn't that a great conversation? As a reminder, I'm Brandon Smith. I'm our host this week to the Leadership Foundry podcast. I'm also the co-founder of the Leadership Foundry. I loved my conversation with Vivian. She reminds us that resilience is so critical if we're going to navigate through crisis. We have to be resilient. And she also reminds us that resilience is not just bouncing back to doing the same things we were doing before. It's adaptability. And so when I asked Vivian what really makes up resilience, she gave us 5 parts. She said it's perspective, having an optimistic outlook, purpose, having a clear purpose, perseverance, partnership, and then our 5th one, praise. And so I won't go through all those in detail, but what stood out for me is 2 things. First, purpose. We need to always be rethinking and revisiting what is it that our customers need? What's the need in the world we're trying to meet? That's one of those ways that we activate the organization. And then I'm going to go all the way to the last one, praise. I love the fact about praise. She didn't say praise and recognize results. She said praise and recognize efforts and progress. So make sure that we're recognizing folks who are working really hard, because that's part of resilience. We don't necessarily always see the results, but make sure we're doing that, and make sure we're doing it with ourselves to help ourselves become more resilient too. And then everything she writes about in her book and her accompanying book and workbooks all falls in the big buckets of helping us really bring back more humanity to the workplace and helping us remember that this is a team sport. So I loved my conversation with Vivian. I'm sure you took away some highlights as well. I hope you're able to put those in play so you can not only be a better leader for your teams today, but a better leader for all of us tomorrow.